Hello, everyone, and welcome back yet again to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind that to all those who are viewing the show right now, if you do feel so inclined, throughout any portion of today's show, you can make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features on YouTube, and you can become a part of the show. We've already got some fantastic interaction from our first segment, so I want to keep it going. This is a very fantasy-heavy show, so I do appreciate that sentiment. We are going to stick with this little graphic right here and talk about some hidden gems for our second segment in each round. Now, we've already talked about how to maximize the value of wherever you are drafting. This segment is more about how to interpret the goings-on of the draft, the future of your draft, through the hidden value within it. We talked about some of these guys in this other segments, so this is kind of a reiteration, but these are the guys who I believe will be a hidden gem for you wherever you are picking through rounds 1 through 4, which should be a good setup for you because those are the big rounds where you're building the meat of your team. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Starting off in round 1, we talked about this guy before. It's Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson, everyone was clamoring last year for him to get more usage, but to no avail. Raheem Morris saying this year that Bijan Robinson will get more usage in the system. Last year, Arthur Smith kind of built like this weird thing between him and Tyler Algier. He did have a decent year, had a lot of good scrimmage yards, but this year in a new-look offense with Kirk Cousins leading the way, but with all these young weapons hungry and ready to go, Bijan, out of all of them, looks like the best one for your fantasy team, especially in round 1 when you are kind of in the middle of the pack, like I said, because we already know who pick 1, who pick 2, and maybe even who pick 3 is. But after that, it's really up to you to write your own path in terms of how the fantasy draft goes. And if you pick Bijan Robinson, I think that it will set forth this massive wave of panic in terms of, okay, how am I going to analyze the next tier of running backs that are going to be off the board? And so picking Bijan Robinson really sets a precedent because he's also someone, A, who's young, B, who has raw potential and isn't necessarily someone who's solidified as a superstar. So you really are taking that risk. And B, it also sets up a way for you to either stick with a plan, because if you pick Bijan Robinson, that could go along with the lines of a hero running back plan for you. But also, it could lead you to do many divergent things because Bijan also has a lot of upside receiving. And so you might want to pick a receiver next because if you think Bijan adds value receiving, then you may wait to take another running back. So Bijan certainly adds a lot of value to your draft, and it certainly adds a lot of value to what your draft will look like in return. Then in round 2, this guy is a guy who I picked up myself. A lot of chatter, both positive and negative, have been surrounding him, especially in fantasy terms. But ultimately, I think that he will have a fantastic season. It is Garrett Wilson, because he is in that second tier of wide receivers, like I was saying. And the reason why he's so special is because when we think about those second tiers of wide receivers, where your Drake Londons, your Mike Evans, maybe your Chris Olaves come into play, these are all guys, apart from maybe Mike Evans a little bit, who have had inconsistent quarterback play but have still elevated their games. And Garrett Wilson stands out. Last year, let's talk about his target rate. He was 4th among wide receivers in targets. That's crazy. That's how much the Jets value him, even though they had the offense and personnel to really distribute the ball even more outside of him. So that was really stood out to me, and it should stand out in round 2 when the wide receiver market is going to be called into play here. And so Garrett Wilson kind of sets the tone for a style of wide receiver like I was talking about that adds balance to your team. Because who knows if Aaron Rodgers will really be the guy that elevates Garrett Wilson's game. This offense is really going to go how Aaron Rodgers goes, and if he's not up to par, then perhaps this pick will look silly, and perhaps me telling you this will look silly. But Garrett Wilson is certainly someone to think about as we get into that second tier, second round of wide receivers, especially if you have already taken someone like a Bijan Robinson at the running back position and are starting to think, well, if I want to add more value in terms of getting a balanced wide receiver, then why not pick Garrett Wilson? Then in round 3, another wide receiver who I really like, who I also mentioned in this kind of chat with you, Mike Evans. Mike Evans may not even fall to round 3. That's how good I think he is. But because of his age, perhaps because of these new exciting young receivers with new quarterbacks, perhaps he will fall to round 3. But he's still a paragon of consistency. He was still 10th in fantasy points in his age 30 season. He is someone who just adds value to wherever he goes. And I think about him in terms of not just age, but how he profiles in the Bucs offense, right? Because when I think of the Bucs offense, they certainly profile as one that's very balanced as well. But that being said, Mike Evans is still the most consistent target in that system. And so when I think about the broader landscape of the drafts, if you're in round 3 and you have already selected either a running back or wide receiver, and B 2 running backs, now you really got to start thinking, okay, now I have to take a chance on a wide receiver. And you don't want to get into that panic mode. So having someone like Mike Evans, if he is still on the table, that will really help ease your mind if you have this idea of, okay, I really need to think about picking a wide receiver, but not someone who you know is just either overrated or someone who I'm underrating a little bit too much. So Mike Evans is kind of like the Goldilocks wide receiver. He's just right for where his average draft position has him. And then for round 4, this is a guy who might get a little bit of skepticism, might get a little bit of criticism. But I think that in round 4, when the bets are off in your fantasy drafts, you're kind of thinking about, okay, you already have your top skill position set. You probably already have a wide receiver. So why not get a guy who just could be consistency and could be a surprise? Because this is where sometimes you find the most value out of surprises than any other round in the draft, and that is Alvin Kamara. Now, he's in his age 29 season right now. He is getting up there in age, well, with the Henrys of the world. But last year was still 3rd amongst running backs in fantasy points per game, and he has been top 5 amongst running backs in terms of targets throughout all of the 7 seasons he's played in the league. And so Alvin Kamara, to me, just adds a lot of value, A, because much like any wide receiver, he has an inconsistent quarterback, and B, he makes a lot of sense for that either flex or first bench position if you've already selected your 2 running backs. As T-Money says, I'm back with another trade. I need your opinion. Yesterday, T-Money brought up a trade in the chat, so I'll be glad to offer you any trade advice. So hit me right away, my friend, and we'll get to that. But for now, let's talk about Kamara. Kamara is someone who I feel like is going to be someone who is a safe pick. He's not going to be a guy who breaks the internet with the pick. A lot of people will be surprised by it, but he's a safe pick if you already have your kind of stability set for your draft. Now, in order to really understand the overarching sentiment of what this means in rounds 1 through 4, if all of these players are picked according to their draft position, you really have to understand what you want to do and what other people are thinking you will do based off your draft slot. It's all about the chess game here, because if you're picking in the middle of the round, will already have known what has happened, and it's already set in stone what's happened, as the trade from Team Money has come in. He has said a 10-man PPR. He has, I believe this is his team. He has Christian McCaffrey, James Conner, Drake London, Ayuk, Sam Laporta, Amari Cooper, and Xavier Worthy. And he's saying, should I trade Conner, Ayuk, and Cooper for Pittman and Josh Jacobs, and I'll start Palmer in my flex? And I believe that is Joshua Palmer that he is talking about. So yesterday, he had a trade where I believe it was Conner, London, and Laporta for a bunch of NFC East guys, and Saquon, A.J. Brown, and Jake Ferguson, if I'm not mistaken. And this time around, you are asking to trade Conner, Ayuk, and Cooper for Pittman and Josh Jacobs, and starting Joshua Palmer in your flex. Let's talk about the Joshua Palmer in the flex for a little bit. I think you need to let go of Joshua Palmer, because you need to find someone who will add value to your flex spot. And Joshua Palmer, as much as I like him, he probably profiles as the wide receiver 1 in the Los Angeles Chargers system. I just think that Jim Harbaugh will not have him, will focus on passing the ball. And so I think that you might need to go out, find someone on the waiver wire to replace Josh Palmer. Release him. Getting to the trade. Conner, we talked about yesterday. An interesting profile. Like you said, Conner was a top 5 running back when Kyler Murray was healthy. Brandon Ayuk, the guy who everyone's been talking about this offseason. If he stays with the San Francisco 49ers, I think he will actually be a very productive wide receiver, even though they have a wealth of talent at their disposal there. And then Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper is also someone who's gotten a lot of controversy because he's getting older, and a Brown system that, wants to center around Deshaun Watson getting better. I don't think that Amari Cooper's the answer there. So, in this trade, Ayuk and Cooper, I really like that you are thinking of getting rid of them. But James Conner is where this kind of throws me off, because I think that Conner is a good piece. Looks like a very young team. You have London, Laporta, and Worthy, so you have a lot of young pieces here. And then in return, getting Pittman and Josh Jacobs. Michael Pittman Jr., let's talk about him for a little bit. I really think that this year is going to be crucial for him, because Anthony Richardson is going to need someone at the wide receiver 1 position. That being said, since Anthony Richardson is such a versatile, volatile quarterback, I'm not sure how Michael Pittman, who doesn't necessarily profile as a true wide receiver 1, and his stats in terms of route running haven't necessarily shown that to this point, is going to fit that profile. And then Josh Jacobs moving to Green Bay. Yes, I like that move, and I think it will kind of create pastures anew for him, getting out of whatever tension was happening in Las Vegas. But if you look at the Packers, even under Matt LaFleur, going back to the Mike McCarthy era, they haven't really had that many running backs who have gotten that many touches. And so this time around, I'm also dissuading you from this trade, because even though Ayuk and Cooper, yes, are players who you should think about getting rid of, I still think Pittman and Josh Jacobs are in very, very tough situations in terms of how their offensive profile and set up, that right now, if you were to take Conner out of the equation, maybe I'll be comfortable with it. But with the profile of your overarching team, your youth in this team, the London, who's profiling to probably get the most targets he's ever had, Sam Laporta, still the tight end 1 no matter how bad of a tight end 1 season it was last year. Xavier Worthy can add a lot of depth for you, even dropping him down to the flex position. A great gadget guy who will be used in so many different ways in both the Chiefs' offense and maybe even in special teams. I think that this trade as well you might want to shy away from. Thank you for giving me this trade analysis, T-Money. You have been the man in terms of asking for trade advice. I hope that this is helping you in many different ways. That being said, we are going to take a quick break. before we go to quick break, he has another presentation here. T-Money saying, what if I try to change it to A.J. Brown and K9 Kenneth Walker? Now that trade will be interesting because we talked about A.J. Brown yesterday as well in that trade proposal. A.J. Brown, yes, in the Philadelphia Eagles offense kind of goes under the radar, but I think that this year will be all about getting Jalen Hurts comfortable, and A.J. Brown is more of a deep threat quarterback, even though he is a wide receiver one. And then Kenneth Walker, I actually do like Kenneth Walker. It's not just my Seattle Seahawks bias, but he also is someone who last year, even though Seattle has always been a rushing team, he did not profile as that. So I think that if you try to change that to A.J. Brown and K9, then it will make a little bit more sense because the risk won't be as big. And I think that it's kind of more like for like. But keep Connor. That's my advice to you because I think Connor is a very interesting pick. So I think that if you trade out Ayuk and Cooper for A.J. Brown and K9, I think that would be a trade where you're in business here. And I think that you would be the winner of that trade. So thank you yet again, T-Money, for offering up your trades. I think it's really not only helping me to interpret someone else's fantasy team, but others as well as they answer questions about theirs. So thank you for that input. But we do have to take a quick break right now. Coming up after this quick break, we're going to be talking about the QB situation, the QB market, in terms of the QB market, QB tiers, where all these players will end up going. So we'll be right back to talk about that after this quick break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports